Welcome back to the Backmarkers, the F1 podcast for new fans by new fans. My name is Mike Hurley, and I am joined by my incoming technical director, Austin Evans.
Hello, my friend. I hear that my job is in high demand now. There's a lot of openings on the grid.
Well, I
There's,
would say maybe not as high demand because there are people floating around out there, you know?
Man, you know what? I feel like this has been an interesting season from just the chaos, and that obviously there's always some turnover. There's always some shenanigans when it comes to, you've got 10 teams each with hundreds of employees and all these egos and everything. But I feel like there's been an extra level of just shenanigans, and we're only halfway through the season.
Yep. It feels like silly season has occurred already. Later on in the episode, we'll talk about any possibilities for what could happen for the rest of silly season. In case you're new, silly season is, so we're in the summer break right now. So it's like a month between the races. It's like a time where the teams go away and, they'll rest or they'll do some improvements. But this is also a time of the year when weird contract stuff starts to occur. New deals are made. People start moving. One of the classic ones, obviously, right, is it coincides with season 1 of Drive to Survive when Daniel Ricciardo announces he's leaving Red Bull to join Renault, right?
Yeah.
So that was one of the
bombshell.
silly season things. We are in silly season now, technically. However, it feels like it started weeks ago with our friend Daniel Ricciardo.
You know what? What a just ridiculous. I can't wait for this season of Drive to Survive. I mean, I just think, especially Danny Rick and Drive to Survive are so synonymous. I think that's why, I think in large part, that's why he has such a huge fan base. I think people already liked him before, but
It's
I think
why Red Bull
so many people
hired him, right? Because they put him in that third driver where really he was just doing marketing events for Red Bull.
Yeah.
Because they had reserve drivers. He wasn't even their reserve driver. But now it somehow landed to him sitting in AlphaTauri instead.
Yeah, so basically, he's obviously gone through a very circuitous route through the junior formulas. He got in through what was Toro Rosso, or now I guess AlphaTauri. He actually had a seat, it was HRT when he first got on the grid or whatever. But he obviously worked up through Red Bull, decided to leave because he was maybe getting outshined by Max a little bit, which we can see that history shows that was probably the right move from Red Bull.
I think history, while it seemed weird at the time, I think history has shown that he was best to go then. I think he saw the writing on the wall. It was just going to get worse and worse for him there. Not that he necessarily had much success anywhere else, but it was probably better for him from a market perspective to be experienced in other teams than to be sitting around being made to look like a fool from Max Verstappen, probably.
Yeah, and obviously it was very profitable for him, maybe not for his reputation, but he made a ton of money at Renault, then later Alpine. I think he left right before it turned into Alpine.
Yeah, he did.
And then obviously he had those couple of years in McLaren, that didn't maybe end quite so well. But
I would say what he was worried about Max Verstappen at Red Bull happened to him at McLaren with Lando.
Yeah, in
right?
a big way.
Lando made him look like a fool by the end of it, really.
Yeah. So he had some time off, and mind you, I do think that it was probably a rough period of time for him, going from Renault, which as soon as he announced that he was leaving, which he did announce quite early, there's a lot of bad blood there, and I think we're going to talk a little bit more about Renault/Alpine and that maybe that team's not the healthiest dynamic period. But then from there to go to McLaren, have all these issues, have all these just absolute annihilation at the hands of Lando. And then basically he sort of retired at the end of the last year. He didn't actually fully quit, but he was basically you know what, I'm not going to be on the grid next year. I'm just going to be kind of trying to reset myself. He got that third driver gig with Red Bull, which, you're right. At the time, it felt very much more like a PR move of just, Danny Rick's really popular. He's coming home. It's good narrative,
And it kept him around, right? Which I think is why he did it, which I think was smart. It kept him in the public eye. It kept him in the eye of the teams, right? It was just a smart move to not leave the grid completely.
Yes, because I believe he probably had some, at least, interest from some of the other teams like Haas or maybe Williams or whatever. But I think he was pretty clear last year that he didn't want to just go to a backmarker team just to be there. And I mean, hindsight has proven. Well, hindsight has proven that at least going to AlphaTauri, has there's a shot, right? He knows Checo.
I mean, he is arguably in the worst team on the grid right now, or second to worst, right? It's kind of between. We're going to talk about the teams how they're standing, but just if you're looking at performance on track. I mean, it's between them and Alfa Romeo right now. I feel like of like these are the
Yeah.
kind of the worst teams around. Can we talk
But
about Nick de Vries?
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
oh, it's
I mean,
rough, man.
it's kind of hard to judge because you're right. That AlphaTauri is awful, and Yuki has had a couple seasons to really sort of get settled in, and it's just very difficult to understand how much of the struggles of that car are the car versus the driver. I tend to think that the car is quite bad, but maybe not quite as bad as what we have been sort of led to believe.
Mm-hmm.
I still have put a lot of stock in Yuki. I still think that like this year he's
Yuki's
actually
done a
stepped up in a
decent
big
job.
way.
Like he seems like he's more switched on. There seems like there's less like childish aggression from him, which we've seen in the
Yeah,
past, right? So like it does, it's not there, but it feels like
yeah,
he has been able to kind of like channel himself a little more, and like he seems to really credit Pierre as like the
yeah.
person who helped him understand, and I think he now works with Daniel Ricciardo's old trainer. I think I've seen
Oh,
on
interesting. I didn't
Instagram.
know
I
that.
don't know if that's now going to change now that Danny's back on the grid. But so the thing about Nick de Vries, it's awkward because in Drive to Survive, he had the whole
Oh,
like I'm not a rookie thing, right? Which is
yeah.
that felt like that was going to come back to bite him, and it really did. And so I was watching because I was wondering too of like, all right, he had a bad season, he made a bunch of mistakes, he wasn't doing very well, but it was very much felt like a typical rookie season, like the one of the two ways a rookie season can tend to go in modern
Yeah.
times, and well, at least on a back marker team, right? Because obviously you can do like a Lewis or a Max or a look at old Oscar Piastri
Right.
now, right? You can, but they're like more rare. The typical ones that either like you just go along unnoticed or you put the car into the wall a bunch of times. And to get rid of him not even halfway through the season seems a bit of an aggressive move. But I was watching the P1 podcast with Matt and Tommy, and one of the things that
Mhm.
they said, it's like a really interesting insight, was that De Vries is older. And
Yes.
he, if it seemed like they needed to put multiple years of work in for him, it wasn't going to work
Yeah.
for Red Bull because
Yeah.
he's in his late 20s, right? I think. And
I believe so.
so
Yeah.
his life time in racing is going to be too short. And if they invest multiple years into him, the Red Bull, the organization, will probably not get what they were looking for. And so it would make more sense to go the route that they've gone now of putting someone experienced in and then replacing that with one of their juniors down the line.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like it's a tough thing because it's I think that AlphaTauri was bad, and so I don't think Nick got a great opportunity to show his
No.
skills. And I do think you look at sort of his sort of history. He's typically not been one of these guys who just hops in and immediately just dominates, right? Like when he's like won like Formula E, and I
Mm-hmm.
think he took a couple times to win the Formula 2 championship. Like it's one of those things where it's not like instant for him. But I completely agree. It was in hindsight, I think a very strange move for Red Bull to basically, well, really for Helmut Marko to just say, "Hey, great job in that Williams last year. You got a point. That's super impressive. Come on over." Like I think it was maybe a little bit too hasty of a decision, and that's proven out to be the case. But at the end of the day, I mean, yes, I think Red Bull are probably the most aggressive team on the grid at dropping drivers like mid-season and all this kind of stuff. But on the other side, they're the definitely the biggest driver of bringing new talent onto the grid and
Yep.
supporting junior drivers and taking risks. And I mean, they own two teams for a reason, just to make sure they can funnel the newer drivers up through to Red Bull. So it's like to me, it was clear that it was not going to work out. That another few months or even the rest of the year was not really going to do anything.
Probably
And I
not.
think from Red Bull's perspective, bringing Danny Rick in the car is really interesting because first of all, they have at least a little bit of an idea of his level. They certainly have an idea of Yuki's level, and they've also got the potential Checo problem. So it's like by putting him in that seat and at least giving him, the next, few months and the half the season or whatever to get some results, they'll have a much better idea of their options for Checo. They also, I think, it's going to be interesting to see how he really is able to measure up to Yuki because it's hard to say when the car's bad. But I feel like we've seen flashes of like, wait a minute, Yuki's actually like, I mean, we've always known he's quick, but but we've seen like he's actually like had some really good actual like strategic drives. Like he's like really sort of advancing as a driver. So I'm really curious to see like. I don't think it's a done deal at all that Danny Rick is able to outperform Yuki. I know that most people are kind of just assuming, oh, of course, the old Danny Rick's gonna crush him, but like
He
I think
hasn't.
Yuki actually might be better. Yeah, Yuki might be better than a lot of people
Yeah.
kind of give him credit for.
I
So I think
I
it
love
opens their
Daniel
options.
Ricciardo. I don't rate modern Daniel Ricciardo. I don't. Like I will say
Yeah.
it. Like I thought he was going to be a disaster in his last 2 races, and he has not been. And so like I'm happy to be wrong there because I want to see him perform. But like we'll talk later on about Checo.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think Daniel Ricciardo is a worry for Checo. Like I just don't see that. Like I think a lot of
Yeah.
people really want this to be the story, but I do not. I honestly, to me, if you put Daniel Ricciardo in that Red Bull, I do not see him doing a better job than current Sergio Perez,
I agree.
who has had a not great second half of the first half of the season, right?
Yeah.
But he's still putting in great performances. I don't see Daniel Ricciardo doing that based on his time at McLaren, right? Like
Yeah.
Lando was
Yeah.
crushing him. Like, I feel like it's maybe we've too soon forgotten that everyone thought he wasn't going to have a seat this year anyway, right? As
Yeah.
we were getting
Yeah.
towards the end of the last season, it was a foregone conclusion that Ricciardo was going to be gone from McLaren. And so, like, I don't see how now we could put him in what is the best car and hope that he's going to get, like, a fantastic result. Like, I don't really see that being the case, but...
Yeah, no, I agree. I think again, we can talk about Checo later, but
Yeah.
from the Red Bull perspective, they now have three interesting potential partners to Max, right? Where our Checo obviously is the safer bet. He's there. He's already got contracts. That's the obvious sort of decision. But you've got Yuki, who again they can help maybe evaluate a little bit more, and they also have Danny Rick, who, if nothing else, might just put the pressure on Checo to step it up because it's a clear sort of like warning sign of like, hey, Checo, we want you to be our guy, but we've got, the backup, who if you drop the ball, we're going to swap you out. It not only shows that they're not going to mess around by dropping drivers, but also that they do have a decent sort of talent pool in the background. So to me, I think it's more so of just a strategic move for Red Bull to be able to have those backup options. And again, to help get a little bit of a better sense for what Danny Rick's level is, what Yuki's level is when they're going head to head.
I think one of the biggest stories of the last few weeks has been Aston down, McLaren up. Like, when we last recorded, it felt like, oh, Aston Martin's second team now. Like, they found it, they've unlocked it. My read on this now is that Aston Martin just put their upgrades in earlier than everybody else. So, like, what would have been their upgrades? Because that's how it feels, right? Of like, we started the season and they were doing okay, and then they, like, propelled and were making everybody else look bad. And then some teams started to come up a bit closer. And then McLaren just went from the back to the front, which is unbelievable, right? So they found their upgrade package has now propelled them to be a contender now for the rest of the season, it would seem.
Can I give you my theory?
Yeah.
So I think that almost every team on the grid, their current like sort of competitiveness is just how quickly they hit the photocopier button on the Red Bull last year.
Oh, yeah.
If you remember.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that makes so
Aston,
much sense.
they had a really rough beginning of last year, right? There was all this hype, Aston Martin, piles of money, and then clearly was not particularly impressive. So I believe it was like mid-season of last year, they kind of like hit the big reset button and started what I believe working on this much more Red Bull inspired design. I think they probably started focusing a little bit more in 2023. So they came out of the starting blocks super strong with a car that was significantly more developed than something like the Mercedes, which again, it was literally the very beginning of this year that Mercedes realized, oh, hey, you know what? We need to just abandon this zero side pod concept. And it's actually somewhat similar when you think about McLaren because, they had talked about even at their launch event, in January, February, whatever. Like, yeah, this car, not great. We've got another one that we're working on right now that once you see it, that'll be really good. And they were 100% true. That car was super underbaked for the first half of the season. But once they brought out their much more Red Bull inspired design, suddenly they had I think, a shocking amount of performance for everyone involved. I don't think anyone was really expecting them to, skyrocket up to start getting, consistent podiums and they almost had two drivers on the podium, a few weeks ago, right? So it's like, to me, I think it's just a matter of Red Bull have the quote unquote correct design of a car. And it's just a matter of who has realized that and tried to copy that as quickly as possible. And it just happened that Aston copied it early. They had a bunch of success early in the year. Now a bunch of the other teams are starting to sort of catch up, and McLaren being a one. And I think that that's sort of skewing that competitive order, which is a little disappointing to me just because I feel like Alonso is a terrific driver, and it's so nice to see him up there. He had like 3 or 4 or 5 podiums. Like he was just absolutely up there, week after week. And now I'm a little concerned, like, oh, you know what? Is he going to be back on the podium
They're
this year?
forgettable
Like,
now. They've gone from being like the talk of the town to like I feel like I'm not really aware of what's going on with them during the race weekends, like during the race itself. Like they're kind of like middle to back, and it's they because I mean as well. It's like what is the talk of the town? The talk of the town is McLaren right now, right? So we're focusing on that a bit more.
And it'd be interesting to see. It'd be interesting just to see like if that really stays true though, because I would not be surprised if there's maybe a little bit more like the way that the regulations are right now, and the way that we've clearly seen teams be massively upward mobile, right? I mean, you didn't really see that, 3, 4, 5 years ago. There was never a point in which, oh, you know what, this team suddenly gained a second per lap and went from like the 8th fastest to the 2nd fastest or something. So I'd be curious to see if we see any more sort of leapfrogging in the standings.
My understanding from just like reading stuff online is that most teams have now turned their attention to next year, like that that there's not necessarily going to be more gains, but maybe some teams have a couple of things that they've yet to implement, right? So maybe it's like there was stuff that was being developed a few months ago that hasn't been put on the car, but that from now there's probably going to be no more new development for later in the season, which I guess would kind of make sense anyway, right? Like if you're talking about like, work you would do now would come in like in 3/4 down the season, really it doesn't, for most teams, that's probably not going to change their outcome very much. But yeah, I mean, I would assume that this is probably how every generation goes, right? That there is one car that dominates and then everybody just tries to copy that concept. Because when we started this out, there were a bunch of different concepts, right? And now Red Bull's one, and now everyone has to try and follow them. And Mercedes were too arrogant, I feel like, and felt like that they could make their concept work, and they didn't.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And also we have to consider that, these regulations are very prescriptive. There's not that much freedom that the teams even have to begin with. And there's also a cost cap, right? So teams like Mercedes and Ferrari can't just throw hundreds of millions of dollars at the problem and just sort of develop their way out of a bad car. Like you kind of have to, at this point, commit to something pretty early. And if you want to pivot, you're going to either have to wait till next year, or in the case of something like McLaren, you're going to basically spend 6 months trying to catch up just to get something that's usable. So, I mean, I think it's good in some ways. And again, we're going to talk a lot about this later. I'm really happy with some of the flexibility we've seen in like the midfield. Like, there's been a lot of stuff where it's been kind of shaking up the order. But what's also been shaking up the order is Alpine. I don't know if you've noticed, they have been dominating the headlines for bad news.
Absolutely dominant in the last week on the F1.com website.
Oh my god, dude! We were texting a lot about this over the last couple of weeks, but like, what a disaster! Of just.
So I have a personal theory about what has happened at Alpine.
Yeah.
So the first domino to fall was the CEO, Lauren Rossi. I think Rossi was the problem here.
Okay.
Because he was making a lot of weird comments about like the performance of the team and if Alpine was, if it was worth continuing. And I got a comment from Alain Prost, who was advising with them. Prost says, Rossi's very public disdain for how the team has been doing raised plenty of eyebrows, and the subsequent staff reshuffle seen him replaced as Alpine CEO. I think that he was like maybe the bad core that then was built around him, and now like Renault have just like stripped the team out, which I also don't think was a good idea. Like it, to me, just doesn't seem like a smart. Like I'm not sure why they felt the need to get rid of their 4 most important team members, right? So they've got rid of the CEO, the team principal of Otmar Safnauer, Alan Permain, who was sporting director, and Pat Fry, who was the chief technical officer. Fry is going to Williams. To be their chief technical officer. I don't know how you get to that point, but I do feel like Rossi seemed to be a problem.
Yeah, no, I never liked the idea of trying to pen a Formula One teams' issues on a person. Like no one person ever is going to be the problem across the board. But when you look at someone like a CEO or a team principal, if things are not going well, you've got to put a significant amount of blame on their shoulders because that's quite literally their job is to make sure that things are going well or at least moving in the right direction. And it just seems like, Alpine is really the only proper works team on the grid who have consistently underperformed, right? I mean, Ferrari, yeah, they're not doing great, but Ferrari, even when they're not doing well, are still able to snipe for occasional podiums, able to qualify well. Like a
Yep.
bad Ferrari is still a decent team. A Aston Martin, maybe in a few years once they've actually got their works deal, I think that expectations will be a little bit raised. But the thing is, there's been so much money poured into that Alpine team, which you could argue maybe that they didn't invest enough. And I think that there is a real argument that, Alpine or slash Renault have come and gone from Formula One so much, and they've got this team. And when they did get Alpine or the existing Renault team, like it was in kind of rough shape, right? So they had to sort of invest in it. So it's just one of those things where it doesn't seem like they've hit their stride in any way. They probably were most competitive when they had a okay car and Danny Rick behind the wheel. Like that seemed like that was sort of like peak Renault. But they've got decent drivers, but it doesn't seem like the team is built in any sort of structurally sound way around them whatsoever. And the problem is, it's just I don't understand what they need to do because it just feels like they do potentially need this full reset. Maybe they do need to just clean house, restart, but that's a really dangerous idea with an F1 team. Like, oh, we're just going to just fire everyone and just start over from scratch. Okay, cool. What's the goal? I don't know, not to suck anymore. It's like, well, it's going to be a little hard for me to wrap my head around them just doing this in such a scattershot, sort of unorganized
It
kind of way.
seems like
Is it
they've
going to be
done it
better?
midway through the season without a plan, because
Yes, that's it.
that's the thing that concerns me. It's like, well,
Yeah.
who's the team principal? Who is it? Like, I
Yeah.
feel like this would have been a better announcement if they would have immediately said who was going to fill these roles.
Yes.
Because also it was
Yes.
super weird where it was like, all right, we're doing it now, but they'll all be in place this weekend. And then why did they do it before the Belgian Grand Prix? Why didn't they do it after the Belgian
after.
Grand Prix?
It's like when you get fired at work and your boss says, "Hey, but can you stay on a couple extra days and train your replacement?" It's like,
But like you
how
had
about
the
no?
perfect time, which is the summer break. Like, why did they? It's all very weird, right? And like, yeah, I don't like. I see what you're saying about like pinning things. I do believe that the team principal is a role that makes an effect.
Yes. Yeah. No, it's certainly something. I mean, again, it is your job as the team
Yes.
principal to make sure that, that things are being progressed in the right way, that the right people are in the right places. Like, I mean, that's one of the things I feel like, sometimes even in like the regular business world, people go like, oh man, this CEO makes all this money. It's like, okay, yeah, obviously maybe $100 million a year is stupid, right? I'm
Yep.
not defending that. But I think it's easy to just say like, oh, a CEO or a team principal, whatever, is just sort of this like ceremonial like figurehead. It's like, no, the buck stops with them. And when you're talking about these massive sums and these incredibly important projects or companies or whatever, the CEO is getting paid all that money because if he does not do what he needs to do, then it is a catastrophic thing for, hundreds or maybe even thousands of people. So it's like, if you don't have that right structure in place and if you're not progressing in the way that you should, and you're seeing that everyone's flying past you, Aston flew past them, now McLaren's flown past them, and it's just like, what are they doing? They're just sitting there spinning their wheels, and if you don't see some progress, it's like you got to assume that like Renault slash Alpine are gonna like, what? Why are we even bothering? What like let's just sell this team off. Which, to be fair, earlier this year, it's easy to forget that they did actually sell a chunk of the team to a series of investors, including I think it wasn't it like Ryan Reynolds and some
Oh my
celebrities.
God, I
and,
forgot about that.
yeah, so like clearly they're trying to like diversify themselves a little bit away from the F1 team, which is still probably worth a solid $1 billion or whatever. It's not cheap, it's not nothing, but it's just like you just see them not making progress, and it's just like, what are we even doing here?
Yeah, because I feel like at McLaren, Andreas Stella seems to have had an impact. Like when McLaren started to have their resurgence, that was a lot of the conversation was around like, it was Andreas's plan. Like he came in late, so couldn't put things into place, and then they did a big reshuffling of their technical organization and how like the decisions flowed through the team. And so they're saying that a lot of that is what led to the performance that they're seeing now. And I believe that is the case, right? But you've got to give people time too. But yeah, this whole thing just seems very awkward and weird and without a plan. And I think the without a planness of it all makes me a little concerned for them.
Not good. It's not good. But you know what? That's why we watch F1. We want it. We want
Drama,
the action
baby.
on and off track.
Yep,
Yeah,
it's the drama.
gotta keep Drive to Survive spicy for next year.
Should we take a quick look through the teams and just maybe give like some high level thoughts wherever we're interested? So we've got, if we take a look at the teams first, surprise, surprise. So we've got Red Bull at the top. Aston Martin are still second. So Red Bull's at 224 points. Aston Martin is at 102. Mercedes is literally right behind them now at 96 points. And I expect that to change. I reckon that probably after the summer break, within a race or two, Mercedes will be up there, taking Aston Martin's place if the current trends continue. Ferrari...
Quick question.
Yeah.
Wait, on the actual team standings, because isn't Mercedes P2 and Aston's P3 right now?
Let me refresh my browser window. Yep. There's a cache. This was
Mike,
cached from months ago. Red Bull is at 503 points. Mercedes is at 247. Aston Martin is at 196.
Am I hallucinating? Like, wait, I thought Mercedes passed them.
I mean, I've got to say, I'm very impressed with the performance of the caching on Microsoft Edge.
Yeah, no kidding.
This machine has been power cycled multiple times, but it kept that information. So, like, really, this episode brought to you by the caching system of Microsoft Edge. If you would like your data to be 6 months out of date, use Microsoft Edge.
It's okay. Internet Explorer is still with us in spirit.
Incredible. Wow, that was wild. All right, so let me restart that. Red Bull at 503 points. Mercedes at 247. Aston Martin at 196. Aston Martin are slipping down the order. Ferrari's at 191. So Ferrari is right on their tails. That will change over. McLaren has jumped up to 103. Then Alpine at 57. Williams at 11. Haas at 11. Alfa Romeo, 9 points at 9th, and Alpha Tauri, 3 points in 10th position on the grid.
Oh, man. I mean, you can break it up to, like, it feels like Williams, Haas, and Alfa Romeo are quite well balanced. I would say that Williams is probably actually the better car of them, but it's hard to say because Sargent hasn't been super impressive. I think Albon has been tremendously successful. I think that it's easy to say that this is his best season in F1 yet. I just think that the
and
results
James
he's pulling out of that
Vowles
car-
is the greatest team principal. Like, I don't know if you follow their social media at all, Williams.
Yeah.
The way he can communicate what's going on with a team and the decisions that they make, next level. Like, that is, if you do one thing after this episode, if you're not following Williams on Instagram or whatever, you should be, because James will come on and he'll talk about, like, he even talks about their strategy decisions. Like, if they make a good one or a bad one, he'd be like, so we thought it was going to be this, but it ended up not really going that way. But this is why we would still have made that decision. It's just like, he's such a good communicator. I like as well, like, that Sky are bringing him in. Like, he's one of the people that they bring in to talk about stuff. And I think he's awesome. Like, I think, honestly, once he's done, he'll probably go into the media side because it's like Bernie Collins. Like, I really like Bernie Collins as an addition to the broadcast team as well. Like, Bernie does such a good job of explaining the strategy. But, like, I've never heard someone talk so clearly about team decisions as James Vowles has been doing. It's super good.
Yeah, no, I think it's that, as we're talking about Alpine a second ago, that is what real leadership looks like. They have someone who is incredibly sharp, who understands the way that things should be. I also appreciate the fact that he's very, I think, sort of plain spoken, and that you don't hear, like, almost everyone is full of politics, and they give you these very political answers of like, oh, blah blah blah. I feel like he's like, yeah, we're not good. We have 20-year-old tech in the factory. We need to do this, but we are going to do it. Like that. I mean, you've got to imagine as a team who has had a rough period for 10 years now at this point, almost, since they had any kind of vague sort of success. You got to imagine that is such a breath of fresh air. Like, hey, wait a minute, this is not the same sort of disaster that we've been kind of working with. Like, this is actually, fresh energy, fresh ideas from a guy who clearly knows how to be a part of a championship winning team. Yep. So to me, it's like That's exciting to see. I'm happy to see that. And it's like Haas and Alpha are not terrible, but it's clearly like there's like sort of that like Group C on the bottom. You've got sort of Alpine, who were well ahead of everyone, including McLaren, or at least ahead of the bottom five, until McLaren out of nowhere went from like what they had like 20 or 30 points a few races ago. Now they're at 100. So you imagine just a few more races like that. It's possible
They
could
went
catch
from
Alpha.
like P16, P17 to P2,
Yeah.
P3, like in just a
Yes.
week. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, it's wild, but it's good for them, right? I'm very
I'm
happy
very
that they
happy.
are able
Yeah.
to do that. And honestly, Ferrari, it's still a little bit of a disappointment, but again, it almost feels like Ferrari are having a non-season. Like
They're
last year,
forgettable.
they were, yes,
Yeah.
yeah, they had a real shot last year. Or at least it felt like that in the first half of the year. Now it's like they're there. They're kind of almost, I hate to say this, they're almost kind of back to their sort of natural position, which is like trailing, but on that sort of like kind of lead. They're always in the hunt for points. They're usually in the hunt for the first five positions, but rarely do we ever think like Leclerc was on pole last week, right? And zero people thought he was going to win that race, right? Like it was just not even it was a foregone conclusion.
Yeah.
That
I
he was
mean, it
not gonna be
wasn't
that
an
competitive.
earned pole, right? Which I think was what led
Right.
to it. Like if he would
But
have
even
actually,
P2,
and he did come
even
P2,
yeah.
but
But like, it's just it's just one of those things where like Ferrari have maybe stabilized a little bit, but it just feels like their natural level is almost a little bit lower down. Whereas you see, McLaren, you see Aston, you see Mercedes. That it feels like that's where the dynamic part of the season is, because Red Bull have run away with this thing by 30 kilometers or
yeah.
whatever. Like it's ridiculous, right? But I think the other three teams are really what's kind of keeping things spicy. And it's been okay. We got a lot to talk about, but it's been, I think, a good season. I'll just throw my thoughts out there real
We'll
quick. I think it's been a good season.
we'll double back around to that because talking about we should go to the drivers now. I think this is still true, which I just think is fantastic. Like Max Verstappen at 314 points, Verstappen on his own would be winning the championship for the teams. Max Verstappen has more points than both Mercedes drivers.
It's wild. I think that this year is going to go down as one of the most dominant F1 seasons of all time.
Oh, I
And
mean,
we've
it's got to
seen-
be. It's got to be, right? Like there is no. It's like it's not even a. There's no question. Nothing that happens to him. Honestly, I feel like at this point, if he got a DNF, he'd still win the race. Like I don't know how, but I feel like it doesn't matter what happens to him. He'll still win it. It is truly unbelievable. Like it is dominant. I have not seen this kind of dominance. Like when Mercedes were dominant, Lewis wasn't dominant like this. Like in the seasons that I saw.
Yeah.
Like it is unbelievable.
Like 2020, I think, was a very, very good year for Lewis, but obviously that was a weird year in a bunch of ways. And it's like, you can go back to maybe like the early like hybrid days, where Mercedes were really dominant. But the thing is, it was never quite like this because, you look back in those first few years, and it was really Lewis and Nico going absolutely like head to head. It was not like one driver's going to win 13 races in a row, which is probably what Max is going to end up doing by the end of the year. And it's like you can go honestly, the best analogy would be either to go back to sort of prime Ferrari Schumacher days in the early 2000s, or go even all the way back to when Williams won like 700 billion races in a row, and there's the same sort of dominance for McLaren.
Because
like,
this is the thing that we're hearing a lot now of like the consecutive win records that are being broken by the Red Bull has taken it, right? And now Max is like he's inching closer and closer to having. So like that's the dominance, right? Like like that is it. It's not exciting. I feel like for Max particularly, like it's not thrilling to watch him win. It's thrilling to watch him race. Like he's and he does some interesting things and makes some choices sometimes, but like
it's like an F1 when I set it to easy for the AI.
Yeah.
That feels like what you watch Max every weekend. Which
he does things he doesn't need to do, which I'm not saying is a bad thing, but like he just continues to push, and I guess that's what means he can be so dominant. Is like even when it's obvious he's going to win, he seems to never treat it as such, and will like continue to put in.
Fun.
He's having fun, or he's just in the zone, or like whatever it is, right? And it's like it feels to me like he can't turn it off. And that's what makes him a winner. No, but you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, there is no, like, and they're probably all like this to a point, right? But there's no, like, I'm just gonna like
Bring
race
it
this one
home.
out. It's like he'll
Yeah,
just keep going and going and going
one
and
more pit
building a
stop, right?
bigger and
One
bigger
more.
gap. Yeah. It's like
It's
I gotta be somewhere.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
but like it's truly incredible. But then
Yeah.
but the race, the season is what's happening behind him, and I think
Yes, yes.
that's what I've taken. And I think people that are saying this season is boring, which I'm hearing a lot, like it's only if you're thinking about Max all the time, like
Yeah.
because if what you consider like the part that's boring is that he's winning all the time, just stop paying attention to that. Like there's so much going on behind him. Just pay attention to second and back and just like be like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, he won another one. But like there's so much going on in like not even just the midfield. It's like
Everywhere.
it's like second and backwards.
Yeah.
But Perez is at 189. Alonso is at 149 and Hamilton 148.
Yeah.
Feel like probably Lewis is gonna overtake.
Yeah. Lewis
Right.
has been on quite good form, especially like the last handful of races, but really the whole season. He's
Yeah.
just really been sort of back to prime Lewis with a car which is at least a little bit better than last year. I think. It's
Yeah,
safe
I
to
mean,
say. Like,
Lewis has had a much better season, right? So like so it goes Leclerc at 99, George at 99. Like there's like 50 points between George and Lewis, and George has had a bit of bad luck
Yeah.
this year, but I think they're both doing. I think they're doing kind of what they did last year. I think the two of them are out driving that car again, right? Like I just think that's kind of where they are. They seem to be able to do things that the car is not really letting them do. That's would be my view on it. But the car is better this time than it was this time
Yeah.
last year, but still
Yeah.
not good enough.
It does feel like George's last year. Obviously, George had a good year, and I think that you can chalk up a little bit of his outperformance of Lewis to Lewis did spend a lot of last year trying to get on top of the car. He was doing a lot of the experimental setups and whatnot.
Yeah.
And I think this year around, it feels like maybe the order has been sort of reshuffled a little bit. I think Lewis has just been terrific, right? I
Yep.
think just full stop. I think George has been pretty decent, although I do think that some unluckiness aside, I do think that most weekends Lewis has just had the measure of him. I think
agree.
Lewis has just been more
I
on
agree.
top of it. But
I
I
think the point difference is some of the bad
a little
luck,
bit
right?
much.
Like the fact that there is 50 points between them, but it is not a surprise to me that Hamilton is above Russell because look, I think that going back to what you're saying, like last year, I think Lewis just was not prepared for what was going to happen,
Yeah.
right? Like, and I think that it was more of a shock to him than for George. George was used to dealing with
let's go.
but he was used to difficult. I genuinely feel like he was just more used to difficult drives, and like Lewis
He's like,
had
P10,
coasted.
sign me up.
It's like I'll take it, baby. Although I still feel bad for him, right? Like 'cause I will always feel bad for George Russell because he's like, great, I'm going to win the championship next year. You know what I mean? Like easy. I'm a great driver. I got the best car. No.
Nope.
Sainz is also is in at 7th with 92 points, and then Norris he's pulling up at 69, and then we kind of go on from there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, no real big surprises.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess right now the only drivers who don't have any points are Logan Sargent, Nick de Vries, and Danny Rick. Nick de Vries, obviously, probably if he had some points, he probably would still be around. Danny Rick has only had a couple of races. Sargent has not been particularly impressive. I don't think it's a huge surprise to anyone.
I'm impressed with Logan Sargent.
Are you really? Okay, okay.
Tell me the last bad thing he did.
Well, he didn't do a lot of bad things. He's just not that fast. Like, I
But
think
what I
you
mean,
look at
I
what
feel
Alex is able
like-
to do in the car.
So remember earlier on in the episode, I was talking about the two ways that it can tend to go for a rookie. I think Sargent is on the good path. He's not
he's
putting
on
it
a
in the
fine
wall, right? Like he's not doing
Yeah,
great,
true.
right? But like I had very little faith in him because he just got in, right? Like
Sure.
he just got the amount of points in his super license and they snuck him in and now he's on like so I feel like I was expecting Sargent to be like a Mazepin, right? That like he wouldn't have been able to handle it and it would,
Yeah.
And so I feel like for a first season, he's just putting in the work and like he's making advancements and I would say he's doing fine. Like did anybody expect him at season break to have more than 0 points? Like really?
Yeah, probably not.
Like
Yeah,
I feel like he is doing exactly what should be asked of him at this point.
Yeah, I would say maybe a little bit of like, considering that Alex has gotten 11 points, has pulled in.
Yeah, but Alex
tremendous
Albon used to
qualifying-
drive a Red Bull, right? Like I don't. Like,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't think it's fair to compare the two of them.
I, I I agree. I agree. I only thing is I think Sargent, he's doing fine. I don't think he needs to be fired or anything.
If
But I
he
think
has not
he can be
scored a
doing a little bit
point
better.
by the end of the season, then I'll be disappointed, right? Like that's what I would want.
Agreed.
I want to
Agreed.
see him get in the points for at least one race, and then I would honestly consider that as like chalk it up to a good first year, but we need more
Sure.
next year. But like this
Sure.
is hard, right? This is known to be difficult, right? Like look at Mick Schumacher as well, right? Like
Yeah.
Schumacher in a much worse state than Sargent was, I feel like. So
Yeah.
I just feel like I was expecting Logan Sargent to be a disaster, and he is
Yeah.
mostly just around. And I think that
He's
that is a win for him.
You know what? I'll agree with that. Yeah, yeah. Just existing and not causing millions of dollars of damage every week is probably pretty decent.
Yeah. But I feel like you get one season like that at a team like Williams.
Sure. Well, on the
Because
flip
De
side,
Vries, maybe if De
yeah, yeah,
Vries wasn't putting it in the wall all the time, then he
yeah.
might have been. You know what I mean? Like he was
Yep.
like De Vries did cause one of my favorite moments of all time in Formula One, which is that one wheel, and I think it was in Azerbaijan, just like rolling down the track. I think that was De Vries's wheel, right? But like, I feel like Sargent is. I mean, he's not been perfect. He's span off a few times. He's put it in the wall a couple of times, but like. I don't know. I just feel like he's surprised me. I'm a Sargent fanboy at the moment.
You got a little American blood coursing through your
Yep,
veins.
I'm waving my flags.
You want to hear the Star Spangled Banner on the podium?
Look, all I want is for
Yeah.
him to score a point in Vegas. Then we'll be
Oh,
happy.
that'd be good. That
Logan
would be
Sargent,
good.
P1 Las Vegas.
Oh,
Book it.
you know what? Wait a minute. That's actually not a crazy idea. That Williams is really fast in a straight line, and the Vegas track is basically just
All straight lines.
yeah. You know what? You know
Could
what?
happen.
It's almost as if there's a place that you go to bet on such things called Las Vegas.
Yeah.
Wow, wouldn't that be just a? Anyone else jump out to you? Any other highlights from the drivers?
I mean, we've already spoken about Albon. I would say Zhou Guan Yu's having a good season with
Yeah.
what that Alfa Romeo can do, right? I think he's doing pretty good. The Alpines, again, the team seems like a disaster, but they're both putting in decent. It feels like they're
Yeah.
doing the best they can with what they've got.
Yep.
I love that Lance
Oscar?
Stroll's in the top 10. I just think that's funny. Like, I enjoy that personally.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good.
He's only sorry, let me look at 100 points behind his teammate. Sorry, 102 points behind his teammate, 47 to 149.
Mm-hmm.
So good job, Lance.
But he's still in the top 10. You know what I mean? So it's all good.
Yeah, for me, it's Oscar's the highlight. I
Of
think
course, we have. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think he did not have a super exciting beginning of the year, but I mean that car sucked. When him and Lando are like P17, P19, what do you expect? But I think he's kept his nose clean.
Yep.
He's delivered some really solid performances in the sprint. He really got unlucky not getting the podium a couple weeks ago, and now that the car has been unleashed and is fast, it's really impressive to see him right there with Lando, because I think everyone rates Lando as a very top tier driver, and the fact that Oscar as a rookie is maybe not quite there, but honestly, like he's the two of them. I would actually say, it's weird to say this, but like is probably one of like the closest driver pairings on the grid. Like I would put them
Yep.
alongside like Charles and Carlos, or like
Yep.
Lewis and George, of like two teammates who are both quite consistently in that, maybe not quite as close, but like still doing quite well. And it's like it's impressive to see again as a rookie that he is out there keeping his head when he's got Max and Lewis all over him, and he's just cool, calm, and most importantly fast.
I'm happy to say I was very wrong about Oscar Piastri. Like, I just didn't think he would be able to come close to Lando because Lando's
Yeah, of
so
course.
good, right?
Yep.
And he has, and he is, and he's beaten him in places. So like I'm really happy just because he caused a big mess, right? And like a lot of fuss. And I
Yep.
felt like he needed to be able to cash in on that fuss, and I feel like he now can. It feels like to this point it wasn't his fault that he couldn't, right? But now, like, there's that great meme, the domino meme, right?
Yeah.
Where like there's like someone pushes the small dominoes and there's the big dominoes, and it's like I saw one the other day which was like Oscar Piastri tweet and then like Alpine implodes, right? Because you can.
That's good.
Because as well, I mean, it can't help the situation, right? That now like Alpine can see what Oscar Piastri, like, why don't we have him? You know? But
Yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah, so I'm really hoping Piastri continues and like gets his way like firmly into the top 10 before the end of the season.
Oh
Both
yeah.
him and Lando, to be honest. Like I really want to see McLaren like do the Aston and like storm this thing, right? For the second half of the season. That would just be really
Possible.
great. I would love that. All right, ready for a pit stop?
I am prepared and ready, my
All right.
friend. And go.
This episode of the Backmarkers is brought to you by Bitdefender, a global leader in cybersecurity. In the world of Formula One racing, every millisecond counts, and cybersecurity is no different in stopping attacks. Just like a driver needs a helmet for protection, using a device without proper protection can lead to serious consequences. When it comes to protecting your digital life, you want the best security possible, and that is exactly what Bitdefender provides. Bitdefender is a company that's driven by a mission for top performance in technology and innovation, and they put their customers' needs first and foremost. As a global leader in cybersecurity, Bitdefender has been recognized time and time again for its commitment to excellence. They've won numerous awards for their innovative solutions and dedication to customer satisfaction. Plus, they're trusted by millions of people around the world to keep their digital lives safe and secure, all while constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible in the world of cybersecurity. What sets Bitdefender apart is their focus on innovation and technology. They're always at the forefront of new developments in cybersecurity, working tirelessly to stay ahead of the latest threats. They use advanced machine learning algorithms to detect and block all kinds of threats in real time, and they provide multi-layer protection that keeps you safe from all kinds of online threats, including zero-day attacks. If you want to protect your digital life with the best security possible, trust Bitdefender. Their leadership in cybersecurity is underpinned by a desire to serve customer needs first and foremost. Head to bit.ly/discover Bitdefender to learn more about Bitdefender and find the best cybersecurity solution for you. That is bit.ly/discover Bitdefender. Go there right now, and there's a link in the show notes. Thanks to Bitdefender for their support of this show and all of Relay FM.
Time 1:43:35.
Woo!
That was pretty good. You didn't have to box for the enters that time.
43:35. I shaved 9 seconds.
That's very impressive. Good job, Mike. Are you gonna do a victory lap, some donuts maybe?
I'm very happy to get the fastest pit stop award.
There you go. There you go. Thank you, Bitdefender, for giving Mike the words to win.
The words to win. Oh, I like that. I like that.
Use it next time.
Where are you feeling on the season so far? I feel like there's a lot of takes online about the season. Where are you?
Yeah, we're all spoiled because we've had some of the greatest Formula One seasons of all time recently. I think 2021 is going to go down as one of the best seasons ever. Like it's just that was so phenomenal and incredibly exciting, just terrific, right? Absolutely terrific. So I think we're coming off of that. We're coming off of 2022, which was, I think, a good season, and especially in the first half. There was some real drama as far as like Ferrari are back. All the team orders have been sort of mixed up, and Mercedes falling off the back, and there was a lot of interest and excitement. Even though by the end it was very clear that Red Bull and Max just walked away with it, but for a while there, it was really, really interesting. I think this year it's not quite as chaotic. We're not seeing, these massive swings. But that being said, we are seeing the big swings. And when it comes to like McLaren and Aston, that's something that's definitely not sort of expected going into this year. We've also seen, well, look, I don't think anyone loves to watch, like you were saying earlier, Max win by 45 seconds every weekend. But there's definitely a certain appreciation for me as far as seeing a team and really a driver be so dominant, right? Because it's clear that they are the best team and driver on the grid period right now. And when you put those two together, it's not even funny, right? And I think that, if anything, the fact that Checo has had so many struggles really highlights just how good of a job Max is doing. Because if it was so easy, because the car is so great, Checo should be P2 every weekend, right? Like, it's clear the car has the pace for that. But we're not seeing that. We're seeing that, yes, Checo is a good driver, but it's not that easy to get that sort of speed out of any car. And the fact that Max is dominating so thoroughly, to me, is like, I respect it, right? I respect it. It does make the wins a little bit of a foregone conclusion, but outside of that, I would still say it's a pretty good season. I think that it's just, you just have to kind of lower your expectations a little bit. It's not going to be every year is going to be absolutely amazing and wild. Like the fact that we've got so much sort of chaos in the midfield and teams coming up and down and stuff, like, to me that's still pretty solid. Like, I don't know, what do you think? but I think you might be muted.
I was muted. I
You were
apologize.
just
I was saying something nice about Max Verstappen, and
I
felt
see.
like I
You
had
just
to.
quickly muted. Oh, no, sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, did I say something good? Yeah. What I was saying is, I respect Max Verstappen's dominance, right? Like, bow down to Max Verstappen. I respect his dominance. Like, it's kind of
It's hard to argue. You just like
there is no
What can
argument.
you say?
I'm
Yeah.
like. I'm not the best. I'm not like the number one Max Verstappen fan, right? Everybody knows
course.
this, but
Yeah.
I can see how good he is. Like I see he's probably will be considered one of the greatest of all time, right? Like
Yeah.
just on these seasons alone, like he could retire at the end of this year and it would be like, no, he broke a bunch of records. He's broken records which are benefited by the fact of the seasons being longer, but then he's also breaking
Sure.
records where that's not got nothing to do with it, right?
Yep.
Right, and so I like that he's doing both of those things, right? Like the amount of wins in a season, that's an easier thing to achieve now. But consecutive wins, that's unbelievable. And as I was saying earlier, I've never felt in the time that I've been watching the sport that there was someone so inevitable. Like it's a word that they keep using.
Yeah.
It is a foregone conclusion he will win every race he begins. Like if his four wheels will get over the finish line right now, there is no argument that he will be the winner. Like, he's 30. He clears like 30 seconds. He's like half the way around the lap of the person in second place on a consistent basis. It is truly unbelievable. And I also think one of the things that I find so impressive about Max's driving is I don't feel like I can tell you exactly what it is that sets him apart. Because it's kind of like he just does a bit of all of it. Where like Lewis, I feel like his thing was he would find the focus, right? That like he'd be doing a good thing and they'd be like hammer time, right? That's the meme. And like then he would just do it. He would just like it was almost like you could activate him and then he would set himself apart. But Max, it just feels like he's just always on. Like and he's just there is like I can't point to like I've said that he's aggressive. But I don't think his aggression is the difference when he's leading. Like, I think his aggression is what gets him in the lead sometimes when he has challenge. But, like, when he's out there in the front, like, what is it that means that he pulls 20 seconds over Checo or whatever, right? Like, I genuinely don't know. But it's a spectacle to watch. But I'm more interested in what's going on behind anyway, as I would be with anyone. Like, if it was, obviously I would love it if my team was doing this. But if Lewis was pulling these every week, I would still be focusing on what's happening afterwards because then there's nothing, it's just like not interesting to watch a car on its own go around the track, right? Like it's just not interesting to watch that, especially when there's legitimate challenge going on behind. And that, I think, the last couple of races, for sure, maybe like the last 3 or 4, I feel like things have really started to heat up. And there's a lot more challenge going on, and like that's really exciting for me now. It feels like that, especially the second half of the season, will give us much more of that. Is what I'm expecting, and I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. No, I really kind of just come back to the idea that it's easy to get sort of spoiled by an amazing season, and it kind of like taints others. But like if you think about, I don't know, the last 30 years. I would say 78% of the seasons were pretty dominated by, a driver or a team. And, there's a lot of stuff to be happy about. There's also a lot of stuff to be happy about. Like, there's still a lot more passing that we see now than there were before these new cars came in. Maybe not quite as good as the beginning of last year, but, like, there's a lot of stuff to be positive about. So I'm very much like a glass half full kind of guy. And, you know what? The drama now is something going to go wrong with Max so he doesn't win the race? Because that's about the only way that's going to actually be exciting. Otherwise, I want to see what's going on in P2, P3. I want to see who was inevitably caught out by some weird qualifying change or whatever, and, starting from P17. Like, to me, that's very much kind of where the excitement is. And that's fine, right? It beats everyone being boring and like, oh, here's the 2 Red Bull drivers, here's the 2 Mercedes drivers, here's the 2 Ferrari drivers. Like, it's not like that at all. Like, there's so little in it between the second, third, fourth, and really
I like that
teams.
There are 2 spots on the podium each week where it could be one of 6 people, pretty much. Or like say five really, but like, like five or six people or more. Like, and I like that there is that to it, and like that is mixing up more and more. Like for a point, it felt like it was just going to be Max, Checo, Alonso. Like that's what it looked like. There was a point in the season where it looked like that was what we were going to get every week, and now I'm excited about the fact that is not so clear anymore. And now like friggin' Oscar Piastri's come out, and you know what I mean? Like, and it's like he legitimately could be on the podium any week now. Like that's really exciting to me. But yeah, so like, because I feel like I can just kind of be like, well, if Max is going to win them all, then I'll just focus on other things. But there's also going to there will be a race this season where Max does not win again, like now, right? And like, and that will just be a fun moment. That will be an exciting moment. Who's it going to be? Because I genuinely don't believe he will finish every race. Like that just,
of course,
statistically cannot happen, and that will be a wild race,
He doesn't even have a single DNF this year.
He doesn't.
Right?
He's done all the only times he's not won was when Checo beat him.
Yeah.
Right, like if he has not won, I think he was been second, and it was always Checo. Because I don't think anybody else has won this season, right? Other than Red Bull.
No. Red Bull's definitely blanked the entire season because they also their streak started actually I think in Abu Dhabi last year.
Let me ask you a question.
Definitely won. Yeah, hit me.
We can make like a mini prediction.
Okay, yeah.
Just a simple yes or no.
Okay.
Will Red Bull win every race?
No.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
No,
it would be awesome though, right?
It would be talk about a legendary, like who's ever going to beat that. I think at least because we've got what 10 races to go I think at this point.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds about right.
At this point there's got to be some unreliability. There's got to be some kind of issue that's going to come up at some point to take Max out. And while Checo may be able to be the one who picks up the pieces, I would say the odds of Checo or the odds of Lewis or Lando or Charles or whatever, like any of these guys would, I think, equally be, ready to pick up that and take the win. So
because
I think
if there's a race, right? If there's a race where Max loses it, puts it in the wall, it will be pandemonium, right? Because there will be 6, 7 guys who are like, I can have this.
Yeah.
Right? Like it will be like it. That I think would be quite an interesting race for that reason. Where like I feel like Lewis, George, Charles, Oscar, like Sainz, Lando, like all of these guys probably feel like they could beat Checo, right?
Yeah.
Realistically, while like I'm sure they all believe they could beat Max under certain circumstances, I think that they could all probably say right now, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But I think they all think they could beat Checo. And so, like, if Max was to go out, it would be madness.
Yeah. Look, that's the thing. Like, yeah, it might be boring to watch Max win a bunch, but you don't know that. And all it takes is for, he almost crashed when it started raining last week, right? Where it just has a little bit of rain and all of a sudden, it's getting a little squirrely, right? So it's like, to me, I'm excited to watch the season. I'm excited to continue to watch the season. It's been thoroughly entertaining. And I know we haven't really talked about, but like there have been additional sort of format changes, including like a lot more sprints this year. They started doing that.
I think we'll talk about that because we're going to do another episode to start the second half of the season. We can maybe reflect a little bit on what the formats have been like then.
Yeah. Because it's been spicy, I guess. Yeah. So everyone's complaining. Stop complaining.
Stop complaining.
It's fine.
Just enjoy it, just enjoy. Just have fun. You just spend a couple of hours on a Sunday and just watch some cars. Like we don't need to judge like the excitement of every single race. Like even the boring races, I'm having a good time. Like I'm doing what I want. I'm spending my Sunday. We've spoken a bunch about Checo. We said we'd come back to Checo. Checo's the big story right now, right? Everyone's like, get him out of the car, which I just think is wild. I put my flag in the ground on this one is there is absolutely nobody on the grid right now who is a better pairing for Max Verstappen than Sergio Perez.
Ooh, that's an interesting question or statement, I suppose. Yeah, I think I can agree with that.
He's good enough.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
He's good enough. He's got wins under his belt. He's had a tough time in qualifying recently. But he tends to bring it home in the race, right? Which is ultimately what it's important. And he makes up his places.
Yep.
You look at the other guys, right, that we're talking about. They're all going to try and fight Max more. Whether they'll succeed or not, I feel like they're going to try. And I feel like Sergio is doing the job.
Yes, I agree. I think he discounting a few of the races, when he was didn't make Q3 like 4 or 5 times in a row, or whatever. I think that was too much. I think if that sort of was the form, I don't think he would have a future. But we all know that Checo can be quite bad, and I think that he is doing what he needs to do, which is just to be kind of close-ish to Max. Like that's all you got to do, right? Of just like collect some podiums, be the rear gunner. Like you don't. It I do think it makes sense for Red Bull to have Danny Rick and Yuki in the wings so that Checo's form deteriorates further, that they can swoop in.
There
But
is no world there. I just don't see it. Like I can't imagine a scenario where either Daniel Ricciardo or Yuki Tsunoda would be doing a better job than Sergio Perez right now. I just can't imagine it.
well, if Checo is doing a good job, but the thing is, it's hard to say obviously from the outside, but this is a sport. It's about psychology. It's about sort of like your mental sort of attitude and stuff. And I think that it's I don't like to judge, but like I do think there was a little bit of an issue with Checo for a few races where whether it was well, it wasn't really unreliability so much as just like some bad luck and then some bad decisions. And I just think that these things can stack, and I think that all of these guys are incredibly fast, but it doesn't take that much. I mean, just look at Danny Rick. It doesn't take that much to lose a couple tenths here, a couple tenths there, and suddenly you have plunged down the order. So
Yep.
I do think it makes sense to keep the pressure on him, just to know
Yeah.
like, hey, we need you to perform. We do have a backup plan if you do not perform. And all you need to do is just do what we know you can do, and you're totally fine, right?
Yep.
I think that's a totally reasonable message to send to Checo.
Yep.
Like none of these guys are guaranteed a spot forever. It doesn't matter. Like, you still have to ultimately, at the end of the day, do your job and perform well. So to me, I'm okay with where things are. I do think that Checo just had a bad round of races, but I think he's going to be. I'm really happy that he had sort of a pretty decent race at least before the summer break to kind of help reset things. But yeah, it's tough. It's just a very sort of tough position to be in because look, how many teammates has Max Verstappen had? How many of them have looked or have looked good after that stint? No one at all whatsoever. Max, I think, is a singularly talented driver that's on the grid right now, so no one's going to look good to him. It's just like you just got to survive being Max's teammate. You don't thrive there.
Like this is what I'm saying about Sergio specifically. So I think we've seen so many teammates for Max, and they just crumble. And I don't think he's crumbling. He's had some bad performances in qualifying, some not great stuff going on in the race, but he's still. I feel like he's still holding up his end of the bargain. Like he's second, and I could imagine it staying that way realistically.
Yeah, it should.
Right?
It really,
I do believe there is at least 30% of the reason Daniel Ricciardo is in an Alpha Tower used to scare Sergio.
Yes.
But I don't think that they have plans to swap them.
I think they're keeping their options open, right?
Options are open, but I think a lot of offers would be made before we get to Daniel Ricciardo. Like, look, I love Danny Rick.
You know what? I actually don't agree with that.
You don't think that like Christian Horner, right, would not go to try and get Lando, to try and get Charles? You don't think he'd do that?
I don't think most of the top tier drivers on the grid are eagerly waiting to become Max's teammate. I just don't think that's the
You
case.
don't think they want to be in the
egos.
fastest car? Don't all these guys think they could beat him?
No, I don't. I'm sure everyone thinks that they can beat him.
But that's what I
think most
mean.
people
There is
they're practical.
what's smart, and there is their racer brain.
Yeah, I think most of the guys on the grid are smart enough to realize that even in the same car as Max, they're probably not going to win. That their standing and this sort of the reputation is better off when they have a little bit of an excuse of, oh, it's the car, it's the team, it's the strategy. Look, if Christian goes and calls Leclerc and he calls Lando and he calls Lewis, well, probably not Lewis, but like it calls all these sort of like real top tier drivers and says, hey, we got a seat open, come on over next year. I will tell you, most of them are probably going to say no, even if they were out of contract.
Interesting.
I don't think it's. Look at the history. Look at all the drivers who are quite good who have absolutely gotten destroyed by Max. Why would you want to put yourself on that and almost like, yeah, sure, you race with Max for a couple years, you pick up a couple of wins, and then you're like gone, right? Like no one's gonna want you. You're gonna be dropped. Like you're gonna lose that reputation that you've built up.
Yeah.
So it's like to me, I think that Danny Rick is maybe not the absolute strongest option. I want to be clear. I don't think that it's like a absolutely obvious decision. But if we're at the end of this year and they need to get rid of Checo for whatever reason, doesn't matter. Let's just say that there's a vacation of that seat and they need to fill it. If Danny Rick does a good, impressive job, he needs to pretty comprehensively, I think, outperform Yuki. Pull out some of that Danny Rick magic. It's just gonna be difficult in that car, mind you. But if he's able to do that, then I think he's the obvious.
I agree with that.
There's a lot of ifs.
But there's a lot of ifs.
To get there.
But like the reason I agree with that is because that's exactly what happened to Sergio, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually,
He was not doing very well, right? Well, it was Force India, then Racing Point, right?
Racing Point. Yep.
And remember, he had no seat.
Mm-hmm.
But Red Bull needed someone, and Sergio won a Grand Prix, right? And so they brought him in. So like Daniel Ricciardo could have a similar situation. Like I agree with that, and I would be the first to say, right? Like if Daniel Ricciardo has a season you're predicting he would need to have, I'll be like, maybe they should give him a shot. Yeah. Based on his time at McLaren, I don't imagine it.
Is that Danny Rick still around? Yeah.
Yeah, I just don't imagine it. Maybe he's found a new mode, and like I've been impressed with him so far. So like maybe over the the next few races in the second half of the season, maybe he proves himself in a new way, and like maybe it would be worth giving him another go at Red Bull. But I said there are so many ifs.
Yeah.
That I don't, and I also want to circle back around to what you're saying about the other drivers, right? I agree with what you're saying, that like it is good to have the excuse and stuff like that. But I just don't know if I know how these guys think. That's the thing that I can't reconcile, right? Like, do they think that? I think some of them, like Lewis Hamilton would never drive alongside Max Verstappen. Just not going to happen. Right?
Probably not.
I cannot imagine there is an amount of money in the world that Christian Horner could give to Lewis Hamilton to make him do that. Right? Like I just don't think he would do it because I think he would know this is of no benefit to me. It's better to have the question, right? As who's the best. I don't want to prove it by being in the same car as him. But some of these other guys, I'm just not sure where they think they are. And like realistically, I don't think we even know. Like you put Lando Norris in a Red Bull, I don't know. Put George Russell in a Red Bull, I don't know, right? Like I don't know.
I think it's competitive. Look, out of all the guys, I don't want to say that none of them would take the seat. I think probably one of them would, but I think a lot of them would probably. I mean, first of all, just have to really think about it. But also, it's just not that much of a no-brainer decision, right? It's not a no-brainer. Super risky career gamble that could flush your reputation down the toilet. And yeah, you probably would do okay for a little bit, but it's just like Lando. Okay, look, so let's just say Lando, because I think he's probably the most likely of all these guys, right? Obviously, Max and Lando get along super well. I think Lando would do a good job. Honestly, I do think Lando would do a very good job of competing with Max in a way that some of the other guys, even like a Charles, I don't think that necessarily would be a great pairing.
I think Lando could do it. Like he has that confidence. He has the confidence that I don't think you really see in a lot of other drivers. They're like, and I hear people talk about this too. Like Lando Norris in the wet is quite a thing to behold because it feels like he just doesn't change his driving style.
I will say Yuki's also quite good in the wet. Did you see like some of the laps he was putting in? Like there's definitely some drivers who like, I've always, my dad actually always said this when I was growing up. He always liked Michael Schumacher. He's like, yeah, once it starts raining, he's just like the world's fastest guy. Like it's like he drives if there's like no water. And I remember always thinking about that as a kid. Like, you know what? It does make sense. It's one thing for you to be, a super fast driver when everything's perfect and everything. But when it's wet and you've got, absolute to wrestle control with the car at every corner, and every corner is going to be different conditions and stuff. That really, to me, shows a lot about the sort of the real innate talent of a driver. If you're quick in the rain and of course quick in the dry.
Yeah. But yeah, It's complicated, right? Of like, what do these guys want? And realistically, all they want is to be number one.
Yep.
Right? That's all any of them want. Otherwise, what's the point in being there? And that's the question I have of like, does that feeling get in the way of logic?
Probably. For some of these guys.
Some of them, but I don't know. I don't know.
I assume some of them are also pretty pragmatic about their careers and about salaries and stuff. Like it's difficult to say. Obviously, none of them are like, well, you know what? Yeah, $30 million a year, I'm there. Like most of them are never gonna like say that they think like that. But just to me, it's just like if you are that competitive and you're going into a team which is highly likely to make you look bad after a couple of years, either by, you can't measure up to Max, or you're going to ruin your future career, and you
Mm-hmm.
know that, who's going to really survive as Max's teammate for that long, right? Like, no one. I feel like it's a revolving door, whether you get 6 months, whether you get a year and a half, whether you get 2 or 3 years. Like, no one's really going to stick. Like, you can't imagine that Danny Rick, if he had not left Red Bull, would still be in that seat right now. Like, you just can't imagine it, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think it's you're gonna get moved along just because you're getting absolutely destroyed, and Red Bull are gonna be looking for the next best driver, and they're gonna keep cycling in, and it's just a tough sort of thing. But I don't know. Would you do it? Would you be Max's teammate if you were, say, George or Orlando or Charles? Like, would you do it?
Yeah.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
think you're the best?
But I think if I'm putting myself in their shoes,
Yeah. You want to do it?
you do it. I mean, I genuinely, like, to me, like, I understand everything you're saying, but like, if I'm one of these guys, I have been conditioned to believe that I'm number one, and have been proven that I can be number one. Like, so many of these guys have won a championship,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
that they would know that at that point they had the right match. They had their talent and they had the car. Like, that's what gets these guys to be number one when they're number one. Everyone knows the Red Bull is the best car. Every driver thinks they're the best driver.
Yeah. Look, I maybe it's because I'm not a competitive enough person. I think if it's in
Oh, I
my
feel
head,
I wouldn't do it. Like, me knowing
yeah,
like, I wouldn't do
yeah,
it. Like, if I was like me in my
mhm,
brain, I wouldn't
yeah.
be so stupid. Like, I agree with you. Of like,
You just
I'm
cashed the fat
good.
check.
Yeah, like, I'm good. Like, I'm gonna do my thing. I'm gonna get my work done, and like, that's me. But I just don't think
Yeah.
I know in my bones that they don't all believe that, and I know at least one of them would do it.
Yeah, I think one of them would, but I think most of them would probably say no. But it's a really good hypothetical, though.
I
It's a
love it.
really good hypothetical.
Yeah. But like, as well, I love that just like every Formula One outlet right now, all we're doing is talking about that second seat at Red Bull.
What else are we gonna talk about? It's silly
But I
season,
don't think it's
baby.
going to change. I think we will.
No, I
I
don't.
think not. We will get to the end of this season, and next season it will still be Checo. I don't think it's going to be anyone else.
I agree. I think something would have to go quite spectacularly wrong for Checo. Like, he would have to miss 5 more Q3s in a row, I think, before his seat would be in real proper question.
Yeah. The last thing before we go today,
Yeah,
I
let's
don't
do
think
it.
this
Let's
is going
do
to
it.
happen, but I think this is
Yeah.
hilarious. I saw this go by the other day. There are rumors of a title sponsorship at AlphaTauri from Hugo Boss, right?
Yep. Yep. Yep.
And the rumored name that they would go with is Hugo Boss Bulls Racing. Have you seen this?
Dude, it is the dumbest thing ever. So, like, there's a lot
Who is
of,
Bulls? Who is Bulls? Who is that?
there's no way that someone actually said that. Like,
I
think
don't
someone
believe
just, like,
this is a
heard-
translation error, or like, but like, it's going everywhere. I'm seeing it everywhere right now. There is
yeah.
no world in which this team would become Hugo Boss Bulls Racing.
No way. No way.
But I love it. I
yeah.
think it's hilarious.
Look, clearly AlphaTauri is not going to be called AlphaTauri next year. Whether it's Hugo Boss Racing or whatever, that's fine. And I understand that Red Bull might, considering they own the team, they may want to actually put a little bit more Red Bull branding on it, just to make sure that people know that, this is a Red Bull team. But there's a great article on the race by who wrote it? I don't know. By Scott Mitchell, who really nicely sort of eloquently described why it's such a problem for when the 10 teams are not allowing other entrants on the grid, and yet are rebranding themselves essentially just with sponsor deals left and right. Because there's also a further rumor that potentially Alfa Romeo may move over to sponsoring Haas, and potentially even just rebrand the team as Alfa Romeo, which is really strange to think about how they, Sauber has been, a pretty much independent team that just are
That is
a
weird.
quote unquote Alfa Romeo team. And now they may be doing the same thing with Haas. It feels a little bit sort of disingenuous when you're not letting new teams on the grid because you're trying to protect your own sort of IP, and you're protecting your slice of the pie. And then at that same time, it's one thing for a title sponsorship, that's fine. But when you're rebranding the actual name of the team for a sponsor who comes through, I don't like that. And especially if it ends up with Bulls, what was it?
Hugo Boss Bulls Racing.
I can't take it seriously. That's just not a thing. Like, that is not a thing.
Like,
Look,
because there's no Bulls. Who's the Bulls? It's not called Red Bulls.
You think it's gonna be Hugo Boss Red Bull Racing?
If they did it,
But that's confusing though, because people are gonna think that that's actual real Red Bull, right? Like I do understand they can't just call it Red Bull 2. You know, like there's gonna have to be something different. But Bulls is not a great brand.
but like, why wouldn't it just be like Hugo Boss AlphaTauri?
Yeah, and that's probably a smarter move. Like if they do that, that's fine. I just don't like the idea of completely tearing up the playbook and rebranding a team. Because I mean, keep in mind, it was just a couple years ago. This was Toro Rosso, which it was for like 15 years or something, and then they changed it to AlphaTauri, which is fine. You know, it's still all Red Bull. You know, it was an actual like that made sense. But if they just decide that this year they're going to be Hugo Boss, you know, Bulls Racing, and then the year after it's going to be Costco, Walmart Racing, or I don't like the idea that it's not a title sponsorship. It's an actual like full quote unquote team rebrand. It's not it.
The problem is that like with the Hugo Boss thing, anyways, that AlphaTauri is a fashion brand. Like it's their attempt at a fashion brand. So it's like fashion brand racing. That seems strange to me anyway. True. As like very Hugo true. Boss even coming on board as like so. Yeah, I could understand the situation where they might want to drop the AlphaTauri part.
Yeah.
But that means like like Hugo Boss Toro Racing or something. Yeah. But like look, they might do it, but like Hugo Boss Bulls Racing is just like I don't understand it, man. I just don't get it. Because it is like it's just like there's no Bulls. Like who's the Bulls? Who's the Bulls, Austin? Tell me who the Bulls are.
The Bulls are whoever gets fired from the seat in the next silly season, my friends.
Incredible.
It's good to be back. It's good to go through some of the absolute wacky shenanigans. And we're going to be back actually again very shortly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in just a couple of weeks' time, we'll be coming back just before the beginning of the restart of the season. Maybe there's going to be some news. There's probably going to be some news. And we'll talk about whatever's going on. Because there's a lot of still question marks up in the air that teams like to have resolved before the season begins. And we'll also give up some of our thoughts about the format changes that we see this year. And if or which ones we'd like to see stick or change. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Backmarkers. We'll be back next time. Until then, say goodbye, Austin.
Goodbye, adios, and good luck on silly season.
Bulls.
Stop saying that! It sounds like balls. It sounds like balls. Stop saying that. All right, I'm cutting.